When my best friend Luke and I were in our early 20s, we went on a camping trip in a remote part of the Appalachian woods. It was a place Luke had been to a couple of times, but it was my first visit. We decided to head out on a Tuesday to avoid the weekend crowds. After parking on a narrow dirt road, we hiked a couple of miles into the forest and found a clearing big enough for our 2 tents, a fire pit, and our small camping stove. The day passed without incident. We set up camp, gathered firewood, and cooked some hot dogs over the fire. As night fell, we sat around, drinking cheap beer and telling stories. The stars were out in full force, and the forest was completely silent except for the occasional crackle of the fire. Luke joked about how quiet it was, saying it felt too peaceful. Around 10 p.m., we were getting ready to turn in when we both heard it, a faint whistle, somewhere deep in the trees. It wasn't a bird or an animal, and it wasn't the kind of tune you hum absent-mindedly. It was slow, deliberate, and eerie. We both froze and looked at each other. "Did you hear that?" Luke whispered. I nodded, trying to stay calm, but my heart was pounding. Luke grabbed his flashlight and pointed it toward the trees, but the beam didn't reach far. "Probably nothing," he said, though his voice wavered. The whistling stopped, and the silence returned. But just as we started to relax, there was a rustling sound, a distinct crunch of footsteps on dried leaves. Someone or something was out there. "Hey, who's out there?" Luke yelled. No response. We sat in tense silence for what felt like an eternity before Luke whispered, "Let's just keep the fire going all night. No one's sneaking up on us if it's bright." I nodded, grateful for the light. A couple of hours passed, and while we stayed alert, the forest remained quiet. Just as I was starting to think we'd imagined the whole thing, a loud snap echoed from the edge of the clearing. We both jumped to our feet, Luke grabbing his flashlight and me holding the campfire poker like a weapon. The beam of the flashlight caught something, a figure darting behind a tree. "Who's there?" Luke shouted. Still no response. But then, the whistling started again, this time much closer. We didn't sleep that night. We stayed by the fire until dawn, jumpy at every sound. As soon as the sun came up, we packed up our gear in record time and hiked back to the car. On the way out, we saw something that made my stomach drop. A small pile of rocks in the middle of the trail, stacked neatly. It wasn't there when we came in. To this day, we don't know who or what was out there that night, and honestly, I don't want to find out.